Hey everyone, James here from the Flying Guillotine, bringing you another review. I'm actually going to be reviewing two films today, going back to my man Ringo Lam, who is definitely one of the very notable Hong Kong filmmakers from a certain generation to come out. So going to be covering two sort of golden period Ringo Lam films, and I guess I'd sort of define that as between City on Fire in 1987 up to The Handover in 97 with, I think, maybe his last great film with Full Alert. And going to be talking about Prison on Fire and Prison on Fire 2. Interestingly, these were not just the two times that Ringo ended up directing prison films. Probably the most obvious one is In Hell, which stars Van Damme in 2003. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the Ringo Western films with In Hell, Replicant, and Maximum Risk. Not a big Van Damme fan. I have seen those films recently, and for me, they just don't quite hit in the same way that the films where Ringo was working within that like Hong Kong infrastructure in the 80s and the 90s. They just aren't quite at that level of quality, I guess I would say, for me personally. I know some people do like those films too, and I think there are certain qualities to it, but for me, they don't quite do it for me. Interestingly, I'd actually make the case that Ringo Lam has actually done a fourth prison film that you probably wouldn't think of as a prison film. In fact, I don't know that I would have too until I started thinking about it a little bit and listened to a Podcast on Fire podcast actually, and that is Burning Paradise, which is definitely a wuxia film, but it's a bunch of monks that are put in basically this prison setting, and it's booby trapped to hell. It has a totally different feel than any of these films, but I would personally make the case that that film is a prison film. Really good film too, super entertaining. Very different from these though. Okay, so let's start with Prison on Fire. So I took this synopsis from Wikipedia. Yu, played by Tony Leung Ka-fai, is a young advertising executive in Hong Kong. One night, defending his father from an attack, he accidentally shoves a street thug in front of a bus. Sentenced to 3 years in prison, Yu is fresh meat for the hardened criminals and triad stooges that run things, and is preyed upon by a sadistic guard, Scarface, played by Roy Chung. The virtuous Ching, played by Chow Yun-fat, intervenes, teaching him the ropes of prison life, and a tender friendship develops between the two. I'd say that's a pretty good synopsis. This film was released in 1987, so this is at the very, very early stages of Ringo Lam's career. Released the exact same year, just a little bit later on in the year, from City on Fire. So a really, really jam-packed time for Ringo, and probably the time when he was most acclaimed as far as just like recognized by the critical and awards bodies. Interestingly, also Chow Yun-fat's sort of golden years. Chow Yun-fat was nominated for 3 times in the Best Actor category for In Autumn's Tale, which I believe he won for City on Fire and Prison on Fire. Ringo Lam was also nominated twice, not unlike Francis Ford Coppola for City on Fire and Prison on Fire, and he actually won for City on Fire. So I believe that's the only time he won the award. Maybe I don't want to overspeak, but yeah, he won the award for that. So definitely well received. Did not win for this film, but I think this film was sort of the conversation of that year. The City on Fire nominated for 10 awards. Prison on Fire nominated for 8. So really, really well recognized at the time. I think it was a decent sized hit also in the Hong Kong box office. And like a lot of the Ringo Lam films from this period, it's bristling with a lot of energy. Even though we're in a totally different setting, there's not a lot of gunplay. We're not running through the streets of Hong Kong or anything like that. But it's just very grounded in this prison setting. And I think Ringo Lam directs the hell out of both of these films. I think Prison on Fire is generally considered the better film, and I think I agree with sort of that general consensus, but I do think these films are both really worth watching. Prison on Fire has been seen by 1,900 people on Letterboxd, so not quite as much as sort of City on Fire, which I think is like 5 times that, but definitely seen by sort of a certain circle of people. Which I would kind of include myself of just fans of Hong Kong cinema. It's going to be in like the next 4 or 5 sort of Ringo Lam films that you'll find once you kind of get beyond City on Fire, at least. Both of these films have a couple prison brawl scenes. The first film has one at the beginning that's really good and just sort of sets the stage for like a lot of the brutality and stuff that we see. We see pretty raw-fisted violence. I always like the chaoticness and energy that Ringo Lam sort of directs crowd scenes. There's always like a sense of violence and danger in his scenes that is just, pretty different from his contemporaries, someone like John Woo or something like that. Ringo, I don't know how planned it is or not, but there's a certain unhinged quality to it, where we see bodies banging against like really hard surfaces like tables and stuff like that, or just like batons going straight to the head. And it just feels like violence can explode out of nowhere. At the end, there's a scene where a main character actually, bites a ear off. I don't want to spoil too much, but these scenes all have like this feeling of just like it can explode into violence. And you can sort of see how someone like Tarantino would really, really sort of like that feel to it. A couple standouts here. I would say probably, so I guess I'll get into a couple of, I guess notably in the supporting cast, Roy Chung plays a really, really brutal guard. Both of these films have brutal sort of prison guards that are like, they're a little bit higher up than like your just average prison guard. This one's played by Roy Chung, who has like this underbite, and so he just sort of grits his teeth before it sort of explodes into violence. Definitely known for sort of these sort of villainous roles. Nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this. He's really good in this film. I would say a lot of the strength of this film is between the chemistry of the two leads, Tony Leung Ka-fai, in a really early role for him, who is quite good as sort of like this naive, almost straightforward to a fault, certainly in the prison system, that just does not pick up on cues and stuff like that, and really needs to sort of be hardened and learn the street smarts from someone like Chow Yun-fat. So the chemistry between those two work really well, and I'd say that's a big reason why this film, in my view at least, is superior, is that we can sort of have these two playing off each other a lot more, and Chow, it's less of just like a Chow Yun-fat vehicle like the second one is, and we have a little bit more of a complex and interesting relationship, where Chow Yun-fat clearly likes, or he eventually ends up liking Yu, but it takes some time. And he also is clearly frustrated at different times at how naive that Tony Leung Ka-fai's character can be. Yeah, and it really kind of shows you the prison system really well, and how that sort of like you need to have a certain sort of prison intelligence in order to survive. And the really straightforwardness that Tony Leung Ka-fai's character has really does not help him at all, and continues to get him in trouble, even though probably by regular society standards that would not be the case. So I think, and it also just shows a lot of the prison politics really, really well, like the factions, the wars between factions, and how certain people that would seemingly be neutral kind of get dragged into those conflicts and end up being victimized. And how, it's just the Roy Chung is extra vicious too, and that sort of creates sort of, I don't know, you just see the pressure of all these political situations getting brought into just the prison setting, and it's really well done. And I think the dynamics between all of the different characters, the prisoners, and especially between those two central characters, really serves it well. There's also just a strong vein of energy and cruelty running through this. The action scenes, which again, because of the prison setting, are very different than sort of your heroic bloodshed, like where we have multiple guns and stuff like that, scenes. And it's just really well done. Good use of space, good use of hard surfaces, And I would say, especially, this film concludes with an absolute bang. Just the ending prison riot and how Chow Yun-fat's character, who has mainly been kind of the cool and collected one that has more street prison savvy, I guess, than Qianlin Long Ka-Fai's character, really snaps at the end. And we just see him finally get extremely violent. And and I would say, I'd say this film is definitely one of Ringo Lam's best. And dare I say, I actually think I might prefer this over City on Fire. So really, really good movie. Definitely highly recommend people seek it out. Who won the movie? Probably give it to Ringo. I think this film is just really well directed. Definitely one of my favorite prison dramas. And for me, at least, this film doesn't have hardly any fat on it in the way that the second one, I think, does. So I'd give this film probably a 9 out of 10. So really, really good. One of Ringo Lam's absolute best movies, in my opinion. All right. So Prison on Fire 2. In my opinion, I went in with a lot lower expectation for this because it doesn't really have a reputation of being a very good film. But I actually really like this movie. And I think it's definitely worth seeing, especially if you like the original film. I would say it is fairly similar in some ways to the original film. The prison definitely feels pretty similar, and it kind of covers a lot of prison politics and sort of the dynamics between the prisoners as well. On one hand, this film is definitely too long and totally unnecessary. On the other hand, I'm really glad that they made it. At this period, Chow Yun-fat was just making so many gunplay films and stuff like that, that I think having a little bit more diversity and another prison movie, I'm just glad to have it because it's a good movie, honestly. Is it as good as the first one? I would say definitely not, and I think most people would agree, but I think it's interesting. So Prison on Fire 2, released 91, so 4 years after Ringo Lam, definitely a little bit more established in his career at this point. Seen by only 507 people on Letterboxd, so definitely less seen than the original Prison on Fire. And I think one reason the original film works a little bit better is that Chow Yun-fat works better when he's paired, I think, with a really good co-star. He works so well with a lot of his other male co-stars, if we think about The Killer, where he's working with Danny Lee, or Hard-Boiled with Tony Leung, or the original film with the other Tony Leung Ka-Fai, is that he's just really good with a lot of his male co-stars. And I think this film suffers a little bit by leaning on him a little bit too heavily. And I think he is quite good in that role. And as a result, this sort of feels a little bit more like a charisma piece for Chow Yun-fat specifically. But I think it'd be better if he was paired with someone. And eventually they do end up pairing him with a Chinese prisoner, or a mainland Chinese prisoner named Dragon. And I think the film does start to hit its stride a little bit better once those two are sort of together. But before then, I think it does suffer, especially in comparison with the original film, with just lacking that sort of really strong interplay, and Chow Yun-fat having to sort of show the ropes to a different prisoner. So this one has him a lot more just on his own. I mean, this film runs 111 minutes. I think it's definitely a little more bloated, but it certainly still does have its moments that are quite good. I think some of the action in particular is good. Chow Yun-fat does keep escaping throughout this film. So he escapes, I think, twice and ends up turning himself back in. So we do get some like cool scenes set in sort of like the Hong Kong hillsides. If you've ever been to Hong Kong, you'll know that like on Hong Kong Island, or just Hong Kong in general, like most of the population is centered around very specific places that are extremely dense. But outside of that, there are really dramatic hills and stuff like that. So we have a couple scenes where they're sort of like the mainland prisoner and Chow Yun-fat are running through sort of like this countryside. They're running on rooftops and stuff like that, and you could feel that these rooftops are really, really flimsy. We see a couple guards go through it and stuff like that, and it just has that really characteristic Ringo kinetic, well-staged action where anything can happen. There's some good humor in this, some pooping humor with Ringo Lam, or sorry, not Ringo Lam, Chow Yun-fat and the mainland character. Another thing this film does, and I'd say this is probably the one contribution it does in terms of social commentary compared to the first that I at least picked up on, is there's a lot more tension within the prisons of mainland versus the locals. In my subtitled version, it was calling the locals honkies, which is kind of a funny way to put it, but I kind of got it. Mainland, especially at this time, would definitely be a lot poorer. So, a lot of like the films, the gunplay films at this time, like in the mid 80s and stuff like that, Long Arm of the Law notably have like these mainland Chinese immigrants who are much, much poorer coming to Hong Kong and basically doing crimes. And so that was definitely, something interesting here. I could definitely see the prison sort of factioning up in that sort of way. Whereas, which is an interesting contrast because Chow Yun-fat is basically buddying up with one of the head mainland prison members. So it kind of shows that they can get along theoretically, but they don't. But they tend to clash, at least when it's sort of put into this bigger group setting. So I thought that was pretty interesting too, just to see that dynamic. And that dynamic has really changed in a lot of ways, especially in the Hong Kong film industry. Mainland China, of course, has gotten much wealthier, still not nearly as wealthy as Hong Kong people on average, but the sort of who has the power in those dynamics has changed a fair bit over the years. So again, in this film, we have another pretty good performance. I don't think he's quite as good as Roy Chung, but Sui Elvis, playing the sadistic prison guard in this film, who was also in, I think, Long Arm of the Law 2, playing sort of a really hard-assed cop in that film. And he's good. It's a very, very similar role, which helps to make it sort of feel a little bit like a retread in some ways. And I think this film would have been a little bit better served by drawing up some more distinctive characters around Chow Yun-fat. But yeah, it's a good film, and I think a lot of the reasons the first work continue to work in the second. It's just not quite firing on all cylinders like the first one is. I would say the action is just as good in here, and similar to the first one, it's punctuated with another sort of like extremely violent prison scene where the prison literally gets set on fire, and we have sort of a standoff between Chow Yun-fat, some prisoners, and some guards. I don't want to ruin it, but there is some ocular trauma that would make Lucio Fulci very, very happy. I'd say this is a good film, and I'd say it's better than its reputation. Is it top tier Ringo Lam? No. But is it sort of in that second tier? And especially if you like sort of like those grade A Ringo Lam films in this era, like Prison on Fire or the other ones, I'd say it's definitely worth checking out for sure. So who won the movie? I think this one's a little clearer. Chow Yun-fat gets leaned on heavily for this. He really carries so much of this film, especially the first half. You almost feel bad for him because he really carries a huge emotional burden. He's also playing a character that is a wife killer, so it's a very... if it were not Chow Yun-fat and not having the charisma of him, I think this would be a much more difficult character to like. They even show that part of it too, which is kind of interesting because you would think that would make you dislike him more. And in some ways, I suppose it does. But because he's Chow Yun-fat, he's a very easy person to just sort of get on board with. And throughout the film, it's clear that he has good intentions throughout. So I'm going to give it to Chow Yun-fat here. Another good performance in sort of his golden years. I will give this film a 7 out of 10 rating. So good film, worth checking out, not a masterpiece. All right, so let me know what you think of these films. Let me know what you think of the video. Please comment below, subscribe, hit the like button, and I will see you all next time.